Massachusetts taxpayers bailed out Wall Street firms whose reckless risk-taking and greed caused the financial crisis. Those firms turned around and used that money to pay out exorbitant bonuses to the same executives who made the mess in the first place. Now President Obama and Martha Coakley want to get that taxpayer money back. Who could possibly oppose that? Meet Republican Scott Brown, Wall Street hero. He's against regulations to keep Wall Street greed in check. He's against ending the special tax giveaways for millionaires. And now, he's against President Obama's plan to stop the taxpayer giveaway to Wall Street CEOs. But this champion for greedy bankers voted for hundreds of millions in taxes and fees, including a gas tax on Massachusetts families. And now, Scott Brown wants to let Wall Street keep giving out ridiculous bonuses you pay for. Scott Brown. He's a typical Republican, and he's not on your side.
And I think that when you had Scott Brown come out essentially pro-waterboarding, I'm for enhanced interrogation practices in Massachusetts, and that was okay.
And he would like to start it immediately on Barney Frank.
Yes.
Every day I hold this office, I will give all that is in me to serve you well and make you proud.
Lost in the angst about Obama and Coakley is the little recognized real headline of this vote. You have heard Scott Brown speculating, talking out of his bare bottom, about whether or not the President of the United States was born out of wedlock. You have heard Scott Brown respond to the shout from his supporter that they should stick a curling iron into Ms. Coakley's rectum with the answer, "We can do this." You may not have heard Scott Brown support a constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage or describing two women having a child as being, quote, just not normal. You may not have heard Scott Brown associating himself with the Tea Party movement, perhaps the saddest collection of people who don't want to admit why they really hate, since the racists of the South in the 60s insisted they were really just concerned about states' rights. You may not have heard Scott Brown voting against funding paid leaves of absence for Massachusetts Red Cross workers who had gone to New York to help after 9/11. In short, in Scott Brown, we have an irresponsible, homophobic, racist, reactionary, ex-new model, teabagging supporter of violence against women and against politicians with whom he disagrees. In any other time in our history, this man would have been laughed off the stage as an unqualified and a disaster in the making by the most conservative of conservatives. Instead, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is close to sending this bad joke to the Senate of the United States.
A personal note, you said last night the first call you made after your victory was to Ted Kennedy's widow, Vicki. How comfortable was that for both of you, knowing that you plan to do everything you can to derail what Ted Kennedy called the cause of his lifetime, which is health care reform?
Well, first of all, you're misrepresenting. I never said I was going to do everything I can to stop health care. I believe that everybody should have health care. It's just a question on how we do it. Do we do a one-size-fits-all plan, or do we allow the states to actually get more involved and do what we did?
To that question, how do you identify yourself politically?
As a Scott Brown Republican, I've always been my own person, and that's why I have gotten to where I am. Yeah. And I believe in fiscal responsibility and making sure we live within our means.
Are you socially
we don't tax
liberal?
People back to the Stone Age, and we basically get our fiscal house in order to make sure we don't become economically dependent on China and Russia and put us at a strategical disadvantage. It just makes no sense. So I'm going to go down there and be the same person I've always been.
His message is just common sense, conservative values. Principles, solutions being plugged in to meet the challenges facing America today. People in his state, they're listening to him, and they're getting excited about this dynamic candidate.
We stay with the Massachusetts special Senate election for tonight's first quick comment. Here's the real takeaway from the election of Scott Brown. If the far right disagrees with it, it's a lie. The latest is from an assistant editorial page editor at the Dallas Morning News named Michael Landauer, who writes that I, quote, smeared Brown all night, sort of correcting the record in one rant, dismissing the responses to lies he had told earlier, and coming back with more name-calling. Well, Mr. Landauer is writing on the Internet and thus, in theory, has an infinite amount of space and time to fill. That was it. No refutations, no specifics, just the word lies, as if if designating them were Mr. Landauer's exclusive right. I said Mr. Brown was irresponsible. Specifically, he swore at a hall full of high school students in 2007. Last night, he paraded his daughters out and told the nation they were, quote, available. I said Mr. Brown was homophobic. Specifically, in 2001, he said that two women having a baby together was, quote, not normal. And in 2007, he voted for a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage. I said Mr. Brown was racist. Specifically, in September 2008, a fellow guest in a TV interview noted Barack Obama's mother was married when he was born. Mr. Brown returned to the oldest racial stereotype of them all when he said, quote, well, I don't know about that, ha. I said Mr. Brown was reactionary. Specifically, that is defined as extreme conservatism opposing political or social change. I said Mr. Brown was an ex-nude model. Specifically, in the June 1982 issue of Cosmopolitan magazine. I said Mr. Brown was sexist. Specifically, 9 years ago, he said a woman Massachusetts state senator had, quote, alleged family responsibilities. I said Mr. Brown was teabagging. Specifically, as recently as the 2nd of this month, Mr. Brown was the star of a fundraiser with the Greater Boston Tea Party group at Westboro, Mass. And I said Mr. Brown was a supporter of violence against women and against politicians with whom he disagrees. Specifically this past Sunday, when a man at a Brown rally shouted they should, quote, shove a curling iron up Martha Coakley's butt, Brown responded by answering, we can do this. Or, if that remark was unconnected to the shout, he never refuted, condemned, nor disassociated himself from the call to violence and even sexual assault. Scott Brown is an irresponsible, homophobic, racist, reactionary, sexist, ex-nude model, teabagging supporter of violence against women and against politicians with whom he disagrees. And all the rabid right-wing howling about that only helps prove it. The response to lies is to offer the truth. The response to truths you don't like is to simply call them lies.
And in Psycho Talk tonight, always good to get new people in the club. Massachusetts needs to know what it's going to be getting if this guy Brown becomes the next senator from that state. So I got a Psycho Talk primer for you tonight. All right, let's look at this guy. Back in October 2001, when Brown was a state representative, he voted against a bill to fund Red Cross workers who volunteered at Ground Zero after the September 11th terror attacks. This past weekend, I think Progress asked him about it.
2001, you voted against 9/11 recovery workers, giving them aid. Do you have any comment on that story?
Yes, it was a time when our budget was down. We had a lot of cuts, unfortunately, and we needed to take care of our own priorities first.
Oh, those priorities. You know what Scott Brown prioritized that particular fall? Well, while he was voting against 9/11 rescue workers, he was pushing a bill to build a tax-subsidized golf course. He prioritized a golf course over 9/11 volunteers. And, well, Psycho Talk just keeps coming with this guy. You see, before the 2008 election, he pushed a wingnut theory that President Obama was born out of wedlock.
Barack's mom had him when she was 18 years old.
And married.
Well, I don't know about that.
Folks, that man has no business being in the United States Senate, let alone in Ted Kennedy's old Senate seat. If Scott Brown wins tonight, you can surely expect a lot more of that kind of Psycho Talk.